They said, "Don't touch the old chest in the attic. Yours aren't there." But that night, when everyone was asleep, I opened it and couldn't believe my eyes. The house was never quiet anymore, not in the way it used to be. When my husband was alive, silence meant comfort, newspapers rustling, the kettle whistling, the faint tick of the old wall clock. Now, silence felt sharp, like something lurking behind closed doors. I had lived in this house for nearly 40 years, yet lately I moved through it as though I were a guest. My son and his wife had taken over most of the rooms. They changed the curtains, packed away my china, even replaced the rug in the sitting room with something modern. I told myself these were small things, not worth the ache in my chest. Still, every change was like a quiet erasure. That night we were finishing dinner when the subject first arose. The meal itself had been unremarkable. Takeout cartons lined the counter, each one stripped nearly bare. I sat with Ruby and Daniel, my grandchildren, listening to their chatter about school projects. For a moment, I almost felt part of the family again. Then Julia, my daughter-in-law, pushed her chair back with a scrape. "Mom," she said briskly, "I went up to the attic earlier to put away some boxes. Don't go digging up there, all right? There's nothing for you." Her tone was casual, but too sharp to be harmless. I frowned. "Nothing for me? Most of what's up there is mine." She gave a quick, dismissive laugh. "No, really. It's all old junk. Besides, we've got a big trunk stored away. You know, the one in the corner. Don't touch it. It's not yours." The words landed heavily, though the children hardly noticed. They went on chatting, while my son stared at his plate as if he hadn't heard. I wanted to press her, to ask why, but something about the way her eyes flicked toward him stopped me. It was as if she were speaking for both of them. "Fine," I said quietly. But my mind lingered on it for hours afterward. I had no memory of any trunk that wasn't mine. The attic had always been filled with our family's belongings: holiday decorations, old clothes, boxes of photographs. If something new was there, I hadn't been the one to put it away. That night, lying in bed, I thought of the dust and shadows above the ceiling, the beams creaking with the weight of years. Why forbid me? Why now? The house settled around me as everyone else drifted to sleep. I stared at the dark ceiling, my pulse quickening with questions I couldn't ask out loud. They said it wasn't mine. They said not to touch it. But something inside me whispered otherwise. And in that silence, sharper than any sound, I made a decision. One night soon, when no one was watching, I would see for myself. The next morning, sunlight slanted through the kitchen blinds, catching on the streaks of grease left from last night's takeout. Julia was already bustling around, humming under her breath as she loaded the dishwasher. My son sat at the table scrolling on his phone, his coffee untouched. I poured myself a cup of tea and took the chair across from him. For a moment, I thought of asking directly about the attic, but his face, drawn, tired, closed, stopped me. He hadn't looked me in the eye much these past months. Whenever he did, there was a weight there, as if he carried something he wasn't willing to set down between us. "Morning," he muttered, without lifting his head. "Morning," I answered. My voice sounded too bright, too careful. The children came down soon after, Ruby with her hair in a crooked braid, Daniel dragging his backpack across the floor. Julia's hum sharpened. She snapped at them to hurry up, that they'd miss the bus. The kitchen filled with noise and clutter until, in a rush, they were gone. Silence fell again, heavy. I rinsed my cup and said, almost lightly, "So, what's in that trunk anyway?" Julia mentioned it last night. His phone slipped a little in his hand. He recovered quickly, but not quickly enough. I caught the flicker of alarm in his eyes before he forced a smile. "Just storage." "Old things." "Old things of mine?" I pressed. He shook his head too quickly. "No, nothing you need to worry about. Please, Mom, just leave it. Julia doesn't want you climbing around up there. It's not safe for you anymore." It wasn't the words that chilled me. It was the way he said them. Flat. Final. I didn't reply. I dried my hands on the towel and walked out of the kitchen, but inside my heart hammered. Later, when the house emptied, I drifted to the bottom of the attic stairs. Dust motes danced in the shaft of light spilling through the hatch. The air smelled faintly of cedar and old cloth. I put one hand on the wooden rail, then pulled it back. Not yet. Instead, I wandered into the living room. The rug Julia had chosen was soft beneath my slippers, but it didn't belong here. Not really. My eyes moved to the shelf where family photos used to stand. Pictures of birthdays, holidays, graduations. Most of them were gone now, boxed away somewhere. In their place were Julia's scented candles and framed prints she'd ordered online. It felt less like home every day. I sank into the armchair and stared at the empty space above the mantel. In my head, the trunk loomed large, more than wood and metal. A secret with a pulse. That night, when the house finally grew quiet, I lay awake again. The shadows of the ceiling seemed to shift with each creak of the attic above. Whatever they were hiding, it wasn't just old things. And the longer they told me not to look, the more certain I became. I had to. 2 days passed, and the warning about the attic clung to me like smoke. I tried to distract myself with little routines, watering the plants, folding laundry, knitting in the evenings. But my mind kept circling back to that trunk. It was as though the house itself was pressing me upward, whispering with each groan of the floorboards, "Look, look, look." On the third night, I could no longer resist. The house was still. Julia had gone to bed early, muttering about a headache. My son had lingered downstairs with his laptop, but eventually, I heard the muffled thud of his footsteps as he climbed the stairs. The children were already asleep. I slipped from my room in my slippers, clutching a small flashlight. The hallway stretched dark and hushed, lined with doors that seemed to watch me as I moved. When I reached the narrow attic staircase, I paused, listening. Nothing but the hum of the refrigerator below, the soft tick of the old wall clock. I climbed slowly, my hand steadying on the rail. Dust brushed my sleeve, and the wood creaked with each step. At the top, I eased the hatch open. A cool draft slid down, carrying the smell of mothballs and dry wood. The beam from my flashlight cut across the space, picking out shapes draped in sheets. The rocking chair where I once held my son as a baby. Boxes labeled Christmas and school projects. An old wardrobe leaning sideways. My breath caught. These were pieces of my life, tucked away as though they no longer mattered. And there, in the far corner, half shrouded by an old quilt, was the trunk. It was larger than I'd imagined. Dark wood, iron hinges, a heavy lock glinting faintly in the light. Someone had placed it deliberately, almost ceremoniously, away from everything else. I crossed the attic, each step stirring a little storm of dust. My knees ached, but I pressed on until I stood before it. The quilt slipped under my hand, releasing the faint smell of cedar. My flashlight beam lingered on the lock. I reached out, almost touched it, then drew back. A sound below made me freeze. A door creaking open. Voices. Julia's low murmur, then my son's response, too muffled to catch. I shut off the flashlight, crouching in the darkness, heart racing. Their steps moved down the hallway, not toward me, but toward the kitchen. Cabinets opened, water ran. I stayed still until the house fell quiet again. When I finally rose, my hand hovered once more over the trunk. But I didn't dare open it yet, not tonight. I couldn't risk being caught. Instead, I pulled the quilt back over the wood, retreating slowly to the hatch. Back in bed, staring at the ceiling, I whispered into the darkness, "Tomorrow. Tomorrow, I would see what they had hidden from me." The next night, I prepared myself as though I were going into battle. I wore shoes instead of slippers, carried not just the flashlight but also my reading glasses, and an old letter opener I kept in my nightstand drawer. My hands trembled as I tucked it into my pocket, not because I expected to fight, but because I wanted something, anything, between me and whatever waited inside that trunk. The house slipped into its familiar rhythm of sleep. Julia's door clicked shut around 10. The children's murmured giggles gave way to silence. My son stayed up later, but eventually his heavy steps sounded across the landing. Then, quiet. I crept out, each floorboard threatening to betray me. When I reached the attic hatch, I paused, heart hammering. One deep breath, then another, before I pulled it open and climbed into the cool darkness above. The trunk waited in the corner, as though it had been expecting me. I shone the light directly on the lock. It wasn't even secured, just a heavy clasp that slid aside with a metallic scrape. That small sound echoed through the attic, and I froze, listening. Nothing. Only the faint hum of the night outside. Slowly I pushed the lid open. The smell hit me first. Damp cloth, stone, something older than the house itself. My beam of light swept over folded clothes, neatly packed as though meant to cushion what lay beneath. My hand brushed fabric, then caught on something cold and solid. I pulled back the layers, and there it was, a slab of stone, gray and rough at the edges, a carved rectangle, heavy and deliberate. My breath hitched. The letters came into focus one by one as I leaned closer. My name, my birth date, and below it, a death date. Next week. The flashlight trembled in my grip. For a moment, the attic spun around me, all shadows and dust. I forced myself to breathe, forced myself to look again, as though disbelief might rewrite the stone. But it didn't. My name was there, etched deep enough to last forever. Beside the slab, in a manila envelope, lay papers. I slid it out with shaking hands. A will. My will. Or rather, a version of it. My signature scrawled across the bottom, but not mine. The lines beneath it left everything to my son. The house, the savings, even my jewelry. My knees gave way, and I sat back hard against the wooden beams. The letter opener slid from my pocket and clattered to the floor. This wasn't some cruel joke. This was a plan. The trunk loomed before me like an open grave. My grave. For a long time, I sat frozen, listening to the silence of the sleeping house below. Every creak felt like a footstep, every whisper of wind like someone watching. Finally, I covered the stone again, tucked the papers back inside, and closed the lid. My hands were ice. My heart pounded against my ribs. I climbed down the stairs as though walking out of a nightmare, though I knew I hadn't escaped it. Not yet. I didn't sleep that night. I lay stiff in my bed, my hands gripping the blanket, eyes wide in the dark. Every time the house groaned or the wind rattled a branch against the window, I flinched. The image of the stone, my name, my death date, burned itself into my mind. Morning light finally crept across the room, but it brought no comfort. I rose slowly, each movement deliberate, as though sudden motions might shatter the fragile balance holding me together. Downstairs, Julia was frying eggs. The smell, once comforting, turned my stomach. She greeted me too brightly, like an actress playing a role. "Morning, Mom." "Sleep well?" My throat felt dry. "Fine," I lied. My son sat at the table, scrolling through his phone. He didn't look at me. The children chattered over cereal, oblivious. It all looked so normal, so painfully ordinary, that for a moment I wondered if I had dreamed the attic. But the tremor in my hands told me otherwise. I forced myself to sip tea, to eat half a slice of toast. Every glance Julia cast my way seemed sharper than usual, her eyes lingering just a little too long. When the children left for school and my son disappeared into his office, I stood at the sink, staring out at the backyard. The grass was wet with dew. The swing set, once alive with laughter, now stood still. My reflection in the window looked older than I remembered, older and hunted. I whispered to myself, "They want me gone." The thought chilled me, but it also lit something inside. A stubbornness I hadn't felt in years. If they thought I would go quietly, they didn't know me at all. That day, I moved carefully. I washed my own cup and put it away, separate from the others. I refused the tea Julia offered in the afternoon, claiming I'd already had too much caffeine. I locked my bedroom door for the first time, even while I napped, and I began to plan. In the evening, while Julia drove the children to soccer practice, I pulled out my phone. My hands shook as I typed a message to Helen, my oldest friend. Need to talk. Urgent. Not on the phone. Can you come tomorrow? Her reply was swift. Of course. Noon? Relief washed through me, though it was fragile. I knew I couldn't do this alone. That night at dinner, I watched my son closely. He asked me no questions, offered no warmth. Julia smiled too much, her voice sticky sweet. I thought of the will in the trunk, the stone slab waiting for me, and felt bile rise in my throat. After the dishes were cleared, Julia leaned toward me. We should plan a family outing soon. Maybe next week? My fork clattered against my plate. Next week. The date etched into stone. I forced a smile, my heart thudding in my chest. That sounds lovely. But inside, I knew the clock was ticking. Helen arrived the next day just after noon, as promised. She never knocked timidly. 3 sharp raps on the front door, then a quick push inside before anyone could answer. It was part of her charm, the way she walked into a room as if it always belonged to her. Julia was in the backyard with the children, sipping iced tea while they tossed a ball across the lawn. My son was locked away in his office. The timing couldn't have been better. Helen, I whispered, pulling her quickly into the living room. My hands clutched her arms with more force than I intended. I need you to listen. And not think I've lost my mind. Her sharp blue eyes searched mine. You're shaking. Sit down. Start from the beginning. We sank into the couch, and for a moment, I just held her gaze, trying to find the words. Then it all spilled out. The trunk, the quilt, the cold stone slab etched with my name, the date looming just days away, the will, the forged signature. Helen didn't interrupt. She sat back, her lips pressed tight, her hands folded in her lap. Only when I finished, my breath ragged, did she lean forward. You're telling me they carved your headstone and wrote your will for you? Yes. My voice cracked. I don't know how else to explain it. Why else would it be there? Helen's expression softened, though her eyes flashed with anger. Because they want you gone. And not just gone, gone legally, neatly, with everything tied up in their favor. Hearing her say it made my stomach drop. I thought maybe I was imagining it, I whispered. You're not, she said firmly, but we're not going to let them get away with it. Listen, my husband still has that camera he uses for his fishing trips. Good lens, record sound. We'll keep it ready. You just act normal, but don't eat or drink anything you haven't prepared yourself. Understood? I nodded, my throat tight. Helen reached across and took my hand, her grip steady and warm. You're stronger than they think. But you can't be alone in this. You have me. You have us. A laugh floated in from the yard. Julia's voice, bright and false. Helen's eyes flicked toward the window, then back to me. Play along for now? Let them think you're unsuspecting, but the minute they slip, we'll be ready. I swallowed hard, drawing strength from her certainty. When Helen left an hour later, Julia breezed back inside, flushed from the sun. Your friend was here? Yes, I said evenly. She brought me some magazines. Julia's eyes narrowed slightly, as if she didn't quite believe me, but she smiled anyway. How nice. As she moved into the kitchen, I clutched the folded magazine Helen had slipped me. Inside its glossy pages was a small memory card for the camera, proof waiting to be captured. And suddenly, I wasn't just afraid anymore. I was ready. The days that followed stretched like a taut wire, humming with tension. Every sound in the house felt magnified, every gesture loaded with meaning. I moved carefully, deliberately, as though walking a tightrope above an unseen abyss. Julia noticed, I'm sure. She was too observant not to. She began offering me food more often, cookies she claimed to have baked, tea she insisted would help me sleep, even a bowl of soup one afternoon when I hadn't asked. Each time I smiled and said I wasn't hungry, wasn't thirsty, had already eaten. Her smiles in return grew tighter. At night, I locked my bedroom door and placed a chair against it, listening to the house settle. Once, around midnight, I heard footsteps outside my room. They paused at the door, then moved on. My heart hammered for hours afterward. My son seemed different, too. He lingered less in the kitchen, avoided conversation, his shoulders hunched as if under invisible weight. When I caught his eye, he looked away quickly, as though I'd seen something he didn't want revealed. The children, innocent of it all, asked me to help with their homework, to braid hair, to read stories. I did, clinging to those moments like lifelines. But even then, Julia's presence hovered. She would stand in the doorway, arms folded, her smile too thin. I began to notice patterns. Julia checked the calendar more than once a day, as if counting down to something. My son kept his briefcase close, though he rarely used it before. Once, when he left it on the chair, I brushed my hand across the outside. The shape inside was unmistakable. Papers, thick and official. I didn't dare look closer. Helen checked in daily, her voice sharp and grounding. "Keep calm," she told me. "We'll catch them. Just don't give them what they want." Her husband tested the camera in their kitchen, recording their own dinner to make sure the lens was clear, the sound sharp. Helen promised me they'd be ready at a moment's notice. By Friday, the pressure was unbearable. At breakfast, Julia leaned across the table with a smile too sweet. "We thought we'd take you out on Sunday. A family barbecue in the woods. You'd enjoy the fresh air." My blood ran cold. Sunday. The date etched into stone. I forced my face into stillness, though inside my chest my heart was a drum. "That sounds lovely," I said softly. She studied me, searching for a crack. I gave her none. That evening, I slipped into the bathroom and texted Helen. "Sunday. Forest picnic. Noon. Watch us." Her reply came within seconds. "We'll be there. You won't be alone." I stared at my reflection in the mirror, the lines of age etched deeper by fear, but also by resolve. They thought they had written my ending. But I would write my own. Sunday dawned gray, the kind of sky that pressed low, heavy with unspoken warnings. I rose earlier than the rest of the house, moving with quiet purpose. My hands trembled as I dressed, not from weakness, but from the knowledge that today could be my last. At my writing desk, I opened a fresh notebook. The pen hovered for a moment before words spilled across the page. If anything happens to me today, it will not be an accident. I wrote down everything: the trunk, the stone, the will, Julia's sudden generosity with food and drink, the way my son's eyes refused to meet mine. Every detail was laid bare. I tore the page out carefully and slid it into an envelope, sealing it with shaking fingers. On the front, I scrawled Helen's name. Then I tucked it into the hollow behind the bookshelf in my room, a place no one ever touched. Next, I gathered small things: my mother's locket, my wedding ring, a photo of me holding my son as a baby. I wrapped them in a scarf and placed them in my handbag. Not because I needed them, but because they felt like anchors, proof of who I had been and what I still was. By the time I reached the kitchen, Julia was already there, humming as she packed containers into a cooler. Her smile was wide, almost too wide. "Oh, good. You're up. We'll leave soon." My son entered then, carrying a folded blanket. His eyes flicked to me, then away. "It'll be a good day," he muttered, as though reciting a line. I forced myself to nod. Yes, a good day. The children bounded in, chattering excitedly about the forest and s'mores. Their innocence was a knife twisting in my chest. Did they know? Did they sense what their parents planned? Or were they truly oblivious, shields of laughter between me and the truth? As we loaded the car, I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket. A message from Helen. "We're ready. Stay calm." I slid into the back seat, clutching my bag close. Julia adjusted the mirror and caught my eyes. "You'll enjoy this, Mom. Trust me." The road stretched long and empty as we drove out of town, the trees thickening on either side. My son spoke little, Julia less. The children sang softly in the back seat, their voices weaving with the hum of the tires. I stared out the window, the forest swallowing us whole, and whispered a prayer no one could hear. When we finally pulled into a clearing, Julia clapped her hands. "Perfect spot," she declared. My son unfolded the blanket, setting it neatly on the grass. The cooler thudded down. I stepped out slowly, my legs stiff. Somewhere beyond the trees, unseen but close, Helen and her husband were watching. I held on to that thought like a lifeline. Today was the day they expected me to die. But today was also the day I would survive. The clearing looked almost idyllic at first glance. Sunlight filtered through the branches, dappling the blanket my son spread neatly across the grass. The children laughed as they chased each other between the trees, their voices carrying high and bright. It could have been any Sunday picnic, any family outing, but beneath it all was a current I could feel in my bones. The way Julia moved, too precise, too rehearsed, as she unpacked containers of food. The way my son's eyes darted to me and then away, like a man afraid of what he might reveal if he stared too long. I lowered myself onto the blanket, clutching my handbag close. My heart beat fast, every thud echoing in my chest. I forced my breathing slow, my face calm. If they suspected I knew, they might change their plan. And then I'd lose my chance to expose them. Julia passed me a plate, her smile polished smooth. "Potato salad, Mom?" "You always loved it." My throat tightened. "Later, perhaps," I said, keeping my tone light. She didn't push, just set the plate down between us, her eyes lingering a beat too long. My son busied himself with the cooler, pulling out bottles of soda and a flask. He poured drinks with steady hands, but I noticed the small packet Julia slipped into her palm when she thought I wasn't looking. White powder. Quick, subtle, too practiced. My skin prickled. The children ran back, breathless, and Julia sent them off again with cookies, her voice falsely cheerful. "Go on, play. Don't wander too far." When they disappeared into the trees, she leaned toward my son. Her whisper was too soft to catch, but I saw the nod he gave in reply. I shifted slightly, scanning the tree line. No movement, no sign of Helen or her husband. Panic fluttered in my chest. What if they hadn't come? What if they were too far away to see? Julia pressed a glass into my hand. "Here. To family." The liquid fizzed faintly, sweet-smelling. My fingers trembled around the cup. Somewhere, a bird called. The forest seemed to hold its breath. I lifted the glass, stalling, pretending to sip. Julia's gaze bored into me, sharp and expectant. My son watched too, his jaw tight, as if waiting for the curtain to fall. My pulse roared in my ears. I tilted the glass a fraction closer, just enough to keep up the illusion. And then, at the edge of the clearing, I caught it. A flicker of movement, a glint of sun on glass. Helen's husband with the camera. Helen herself, hand raised in the smallest of signals. Relief surged through me, nearly making me choke. I steadied the glass in my hand and smiled faintly. "To family," I echoed. But I did not drink. The glass in my hand grew heavier by the second. Julia's smile never wavered, but I could see the twitch at the corner of her mouth, the tension riding just beneath her skin. My son sat stiffly, his own drink untouched. "Go on, Mom," Julia urged, her tone dripping with warmth that felt anything but warm. "It's just soda." I held it steady, my knuckles pale around the rim. "I will. I'm just not as quick as I used to be." Her laugh rang false, sharp enough to slice the quiet. From the corner of my eye, I saw the faintest motion beyond the trees. Helen's husband crouched low, lens trained on us. Helen herself was closer now, her face grim, eyes locked on my hand. She saw the powder, the way Julia had slipped it in. They were getting it all. Proof that would shatter the family's lies. Julia leaned back, casual on the surface, but her eyes flickered toward my son. It was a look that said now. He shifted uncomfortably, then cleared his throat. Drink, Mom. Don't let it go flat. I smiled faintly, though my heart hammered. Of course. I lifted the glass, tilting it closer to my lips. And then, like a whisper through the branches, I heard Helen's voice. Just one word, carried on the wind. Wait. I froze. Julia's smile faltered. In that instant, Helen's husband stepped forward, the camera raised high. The red light blinked, recording every detail. His voice rang out across the clearing, steady and loud. Put the glass down. Now Julia jerked back, color draining from her face. My son's head whipped around, panic flashing across his features. I set the glass carefully on the blanket. My hands shook, but my voice was steady. They saw everything. Helen emerged from the trees then, her stride brisk, purposeful. She moved like a storm given human shape, her phone already in hand. Police are on their way, she announced, and we have it all on tape. Every second for a moment, no one spoke. Even the forest seemed to hold still. Then Julia sprang to her feet, her voice rising shrill. This is insane! She's lying, making up stories. Stories don't pour powder into drinks, Helen snapped, cutting her off. My son stood too, his hands half raised, torn between denial and surrender. His face looked older than I'd ever seen it, worn down by the weight of his own choices. The children returned then, laughter fading as they took in the scene. The glass, the camera, the tension in the air. Ruby clutched Daniel's hand, her eyes wide. Dad? Mom? What's happening? No one answered. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, growing louder. My breath shuddered out in a rush. The date etched in stone had arrived. But instead of death, it brought truth. And truth, for the first time in years, was on my side. The sirens grew louder until they seemed to rattle the branches overhead. Julia stood frozen, her hands balled into fists at her sides. My son shifted from foot to foot, pale and sweating. The children clung to each other, confused and frightened. Helen didn't move. She stood like a sentry beside me, phone still in hand, her husband filming steadily. Don't touch the glass, she warned. Evidence. When the police car pulled into the clearing, gravel crunching under its tires, I felt my knees weaken with relief. 2 officers stepped out, one younger, brisk in his movements, the other older, with the weary calm of someone who had seen too much already. What's going on here? The older officer asked, scanning the tense faces, the untouched plates of food, the glass sitting in the center of the blanket like a loaded weapon. Helen spoke before anyone else could. These 2, she pointed at Julia and my son, attempted to poison her. She gestured at me. We have it all on video. You'll see the powder go in. You'll hear the pressure for her to drink. Julia's face flushed deep red. This is ridiculous. She's lying. She's been paranoid for weeks, making wild accusations. The younger officer cut her off sharply. Ma'am, step back. We'll review the footage Helen's husband handed over the camera without hesitation. The officers played the recording right there, the tiny screen glowing in the fading light. Julia's hand, quick but clear, slipping the powder into the glass. My son's urging voice, drink, Mom. Don't let it go flat. The silence that followed was damning. Ruby whimpered, her small voice breaking the stillness. Dad? My son's shoulders sagged. He looked at his daughter, then at me, and for a moment I thought he might apologize, might beg for forgiveness. Instead, he closed his eyes and said nothing. The older officer pocketed the camera. You're both coming with us. He turned to Julia. You first. She exploded then, her calm mask shattering. This is insane. She was supposed to be gone already. Do you know what we gave up for her? Do you know what it's been like carrying her? Her words cut off as the younger officer cuffed her wrists. My son didn't resist. He held out his hands, silent, as though he knew there was no use anymore. The children cried, clinging to each other as the scene unfolded. My heart cracked for them, though I couldn't bring myself to step closer. They deserved the truth, but not from me. Not now. As Julia was led to the car, she spat her last words at me, venom sharp. This isn't over. You'll regret this, but for the first time in weeks, I wasn't afraid. Because this was over. And I had survived the date they carved in stone. The drive back from the forest felt longer than the road out. 2 police cars led the way, lights flashing silently against the trees. I rode with Helen and her husband, my hands clenched in my lap, the sound of Ruby's sobs still echoing in my ears. At the station, everything blurred. Statements, signatures, the cool sterility of fluorescent lights. The officers took my glass for testing, bagged it carefully, labeled it like treasure. They showed me the footage again on a larger screen, and I watched Julia's hand tip the powder into the soda. It was undeniable. The detective, a woman with tired eyes, turned to me. We'll keep you updated. But with this kind of evidence, they won't be walking away. I nodded numbly, exhaustion heavy on my shoulders. Thank you. By the time Helen drove me home, the house loomed like a stranger. Empty now, yet it carried the weight of betrayal in every corner. We stepped inside, and the silence pressed down. No laughter, no footsteps, no sharp remarks from Julia. Just quiet, and it was almost unbearable. Helen squeezed my hand. You can stay with us tonight if you'd rather not be alone. I shook my head. I need to face it, just for one night, to know I can. She studied me, then nodded. We'll call first thing tomorrow. Promise me you'll lock every door, I promise. After she left, I wandered from room to room like a ghost. The living room still smelled faintly of Julia's perfume, cloying and sweet. My son's jacket hung on the back of a chair, abandoned in haste. The children's shoes were lined neatly by the door, small reminders of innocence caught in the crossfire. I climbed the stairs slowly, pausing outside the attic door. For a moment, I thought of the trunk, the stone slab with my name carved deep. My body shivered. I would never go up there again. Instead, I retreated to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. I sat on the bed and let the tears come, slow at first, then uncontrollable, as though every ounce of fear I had bottled up was finally spilling over. I pressed my hands to my face, sobbing until my chest ached. But underneath the grief was something else. A quiet strength. I had faced them, survived them, and brought the truth into daylight. The stone had promised an ending. Instead, it marked a beginning. The next morning, the phone rang early. A neighbor's voice, low and buzzing with gossip. We heard about last night. Police cars at the house? Is it true? I didn't answer the question. Instead, I said, yes, it's true enough. As I hung up, I realized the story would spread through the neighborhood like fire. Whispers would replace suspicion. Everyone would know what my family had tried to do. For once, it wasn't me they'd doubt. It was them. By afternoon, the neighborhood was alive with whispers. Curtains twitched as I stepped out onto the porch, sunlight sharp against my face. I hadn't meant to leave the house, but the 4 walls pressed too tightly, as though they held echoes of Julia's laughter and my son's silence. I needed air. Mrs. Kemp from across the street spotted me first. She froze mid-step, clutching her grocery bags, then crossed hurriedly. "Oh, my dear," she whispered, her voice hushed though the street was empty. "We saw the lights last night. Police cars, right in your drive. Are you all right?" I forced a thin smile. "I'm alive. That's enough for now." Her eyes darted, searching my face for answers. "We've heard things, that they She stopped herself, lowering her voice. That they tried to hurt you. The words stung, though they were true. I nodded once, curtly. Yes, they did. Her hand flew to her mouth. Your own family? I didn't answer. The silence said more than I ever could. By the time I returned inside, 2 more neighbors had stopped me, some curious, others pitying. Their questions piled on top of one another, and with each one, I felt the house shrinking, its walls filled with judgment and shame. I moved through the rooms slowly, letting my fingers trail across familiar surfaces. The dining table where birthdays had been celebrated now felt like a stage for betrayal. The hallway where children's laughter once echoed seemed empty, hollow. Even my bedroom, with its heavy curtains and cedar chest, no longer felt like refuge. Every corner of this house carried weight, not of memories, but of scars. I sat by the window, staring out at the yard. The swing swayed slightly in the breeze. My chest tightened. How could I stay here, in a place where they plotted my death, forged my name, carved a stone for me before I was gone? That thought opened another. What if I didn't? What if I left, severed the ties, sold the house that no longer sheltered me? The idea was terrifying, yet freeing. A new state, a new town, somewhere quiet, where no one knew me as the woman nearly killed by her own family. Helen called in the evening. They've been denied bail, she said, relief clear in her voice. The police are holding them until trial. 2 years, maybe more, if the judge is strict. I thanked her, my voice steady. After we hung up, I stared again at the swing in the yard. The children's laughter haunted me, but so did Julia's words. She was supposed to be gone already. Number. This house wasn't mine anymore. It was their crime scene, and I refused to live in it. The next morning, I woke with purpose. The thought of selling the house had settled in overnight, not as a wild idea, but as the only path forward. I could no longer breathe under its roof without remembering the trunk, the forged papers, the weight of the stone against my fingertips. After breakfast, tea and toast, nothing more. I dialed the number of a local realtor I had once met at a church fundraiser. Her name was Linda Marks, a brisk woman with quick eyes and a steady handshake. She answered on the second ring. Mrs. Harlow? What a surprise. Yes, I said, my voice firmer than I felt. I'd like to speak with you about selling my house. As soon as possible, there was a pause on the other end. Then her voice softened. Of course. I can be there this afternoon. When I hung up, I sat for a long time in the stillness of the kitchen. My hand shook slightly, but beneath the tremor was resolve. This house was not my prison anymore. Linda arrived promptly at 2. She stepped into the foyer, her heels clicking against the tile, and looked around with a practiced eye. It's a beautiful property, she said, her tone professional, though I caught the flicker of curiosity in her glance. She had heard the whispers. Everyone had. I don't care about the beauty, I said quietly. I want it gone. She studied me for a moment, then nodded. Understood. We walked room to room, her pen scratching notes, her voice describing square footage, potential buyers, current market demand. I heard the words, but only distantly. To me, each space told a different story. The dining room where Julia sneered, the hallway where my son avoided my eyes, the attic that held my death carved in stone. At one point, Linda paused at the stairwell. Do you want me to look at the attic as well? No. The word came too quickly, too sharp. I steadied myself. It's just storage. Leave it. She didn't press. By the end of the walkthrough, she closed her folder. We can list immediately. Homes like this don't stay on the market long. Relief surged through me, mixed with grief. Do it, I said. As she left, I stood on the porch, watching her car disappear down the street. The late afternoon sun lit the yard, the swing swaying gently in the breeze. I knew then, I would never see children playing there again. Not mine, not theirs. That night, I sat at my desk and began writing lists. What to pack, what to sell, what to leave behind. The house had been my anchor for decades, but now it was a weight dragging me under, and I was finally ready to cut it loose. Helen came by the next morning with a basket of scones. She always brought food when she was worried, as though butter and sugar could patch the cracks in a heart. I let her in, and she set the basket on the kitchen table without a word, her eyes scanning my face. "You look lighter," she said finally, pouring tea into mismatched mugs. "What happened?" "I called a realtor," I said. My voice didn't tremble, though inside I still felt the echo of that decision. "The house will be listed this week." Her brows lifted, then softened into a small smile. "Good. It's time, isn't it?" "It's past time," I admitted. We sat across from each other, the scones untouched between us. I picked at the edge of my napkin. "I can't stay here, Helen. Every wall holds something I don't want to remember. Every night I hear echoes that don't belong anymore." She nodded slowly. "So where will you go?" The question hung heavy. I hadn't let myself think beyond the sale. I took a deep breath. Somewhere far. Another state, maybe. Somewhere quiet, where no one looks at me and sees this mess. Helen's hand reached across the table, warm against mine. "You don't have to run to hide. You're allowed to start fresh. Think of what you want, not just what you want to leave behind." Her words sank in. For the first time, I pictured it. Not escape, but arrival. A small apartment in a town where the grocery clerk didn't know my family name. A church where no one remembered my son's sharp voice or Julia's practiced smile. Streets where I could walk without whispers chasing me. Helen leaned back, studying me. "You always loved the coast. Remember our trip years ago? You said the ocean made you feel like the world could wash itself clean." A faint smile tugged at my lips. "I remember." "Then go there," she said firmly. "Go find your ocean." I felt tears prick my eyes, but I didn't look away. "Would you visit?" Her answer came without hesitation. "Every year, and I'll bring scones." We both laughed then, softly, but the sound filled the kitchen with something warmer than grief. After she left, I stood by the window watching the yard again. For weeks, it had been nothing but a reminder of what I had nearly lost. But now it looked different, like a place I was already leaving behind. That night, I began searching online for rentals near the coast. I clicked through pictures of small cottages and modest apartments, places with light streaming through the windows, places that whispered of peace. For the first time in a long while, I let myself imagine happiness. 2 days later, the phone rang just after breakfast. The number flashed as unknown, but I answered anyway. "This is Detective Ramos," the voice said. "I wanted to update you on your case." My stomach tightened. "Yes?" "The lab confirmed the substance in your drink. It was a strong sedative, enough to knock you unconscious for hours, potentially fatal given your age and medical history." His voice was steady, professional, but each word landed like a stone. I closed my eyes, steadying myself. "And them?" "They're being charged with attempted murder, conspiracy, and fraud. Bail has been denied again. With the evidence, they're looking at a minimum of 2 years, likely more 2 years. The number should have satisfied me, but it felt both too long and too short. Too long to imagine them free again, too short for what they had tried to do. "Thank you," I said finally. My voice was flat, but inside I felt a strange clarity. Justice wasn't mine to carry anymore. It was in the hands of the court. After I hung up, I walked slowly through the house. The silence was different now. Not oppressive, not heavy. Just hollow. The kind of silence that begged to be replaced by new sounds, new walls, new life. I pulled out 3 suitcases and began packing. At first, I hesitated over every item, the quilt I stitched when my son was born, the faded apron that smelled faintly of cinnamon, the photo albums filled with both joy and sorrow. But then I remembered Helen's words, "Take what you want, not what you're running from." So I chose carefully. Clothes, a few books, my journal. The quilt came with me, but not the apron. The albums I split, one to keep, one to leave. Some memories deserved to rest here, in the house that held them. By noon, boxes were stacked in the hallway, labeled with black marker: keep, donate, trash. I worked slowly, deliberately, each item a decision. The rhythm was calming, like sweeping away dust that had gathered for years. Around 3, Helen stopped by. She gasped softly at the sight of the boxes. "You've been busy." "I need to be," I said. "The realtor will list it tomorrow. I can't stand still anymore." She nodded, then bent to help fold linens. For an hour, we worked in companionable silence. Finally, she said, "Where are you leaning? About moving?" "The coast," I answered. Saying it aloud felt solid, like placing a stone into a foundation. "A small place, near the water. I don't need much." Her smile was quiet, proud. "Then you'll find it. And you'll finally breathe." That night, as I zipped the last suitcase, I stood in the middle of the room and whispered to myself, "This isn't the end. It's the threshold." And for the first time, I believed it. Linda arrived early the next morning, her leather briefcase in one hand, a folder tucked under her arm. She greeted me with the brisk warmth of someone who had already been to 3 houses before mine. "Good news," she said as I let her in. "The market's strong, and with your property's size, location, and condition, you'll have interest right away." We sat at the dining table, the same place where my family once laughed at my prayers, where Julia leaned too close to whisper poison into my son's ear. Now the table held only papers and pens. Linda spread the documents neatly. "We'll sign the listing agreement first. Then I'll have a photographer come tomorrow. The house will be online within 48 hours. I picked up the pen, my hand steady. Signing my name felt like peeling away a layer of the past. With each stroke, I let go. Of the attic, the stone slab, the laughter that turned to betrayal. Linda watched me carefully. "You're sure about this?" "Once it's listed, things move quickly." "I'm sure," I said. My voice didn't waver. "I want it gone." She nodded and tapped the folder closed. "Then it's official." We walked through the house one last time together, her pointing out details to highlight for buyers: the wide porch, the mature trees, the sunlit kitchen. I listened quietly, but inside, my thoughts were elsewhere. None of those things belonged to me anymore. They had become pieces of a stage where my family had rehearsed their cruelty. When Linda left, I stood alone in the foyer, the door clicking softly behind her. For a long time, I just listened. The house creaked in the silence, as though it knew it was being handed off, its secrets soon belonging to someone else. By evening, the phone buzzed. Linda's voice was bright. "I already have an agent interested. Cash buyer, retired couple from out of state. They want a viewing this week." The words caught me off guard. I hadn't expected it so soon. "This week?" "Yes. They're serious. I think it'll move fast." After we hung up, I walked upstairs and opened the window in my bedroom. The night air drifted in, carrying the scent of cut grass and damp earth. I stood there, breathing deeply, letting the coolness settle into my bones. It wasn't fear that I felt anymore. It was anticipation. Later, I sat at my desk and wrote a single line in my journal. "The house is leaving me as much as I am leaving it." And for once, that felt like a blessing. The day of the showing arrived with a strange calm. I woke before sunrise, brewed coffee, and sat in the kitchen while the house groaned quietly around me. For years, every creak in the floorboards had felt like memory tugging at me. Frank's laughter, children's footsteps, even Julia's sharp voice echoing through the hall. But that morning, the house felt almost neutral, as though it was loosening its grip. Linda arrived promptly at 10. She had the same brisk energy, but I could tell she was treading gently, as though she understood that this wasn't just business for me. "They'll be here in 15 minutes," she said. "If you'd rather step out, I can handle everything." I shook my head. "I want to be here. To see it." The couple arrived in a silver sedan. Mr. and Mrs. Evans, Linda had told me. Retired teachers from Michigan, looking for warmth and space. They were ordinary in the best way. Gray hair, kind eyes, matching jackets. When they stepped onto the porch, I felt no dread, only relief. Mrs. Evans clasped my hand warmly. "What a lovely home you have." I smiled faintly. "It's been mine for many years, but it's ready for someone new." They walked through each room slowly, pausing to admire the built-in shelves, the wide windows, the garden view from the back. I trailed behind them at a distance, watching how they touched the walls, how they leaned close to whisper to each other. At one point, Mr. Evans turned to me. "You've cared for it well. You can feel it in the bones." The word struck me. For so long, I'd seen only scars, betrayal, danger, grief. But perhaps the house itself wasn't guilty. It had sheltered me, even when those inside had not. When they reached the attic stairs, Mrs. Evans glanced upward. "May we?" I froze, my throat tight. The trunk, the stone, the memory carved in granite. Linda intervened quickly. "It's just storage. Not much to see." The couple nodded and moved on, but I stood there a moment longer, staring at the door. For the first time, I realized it would no longer be my burden. Whatever lingered up there would belong to someone else, or perhaps to no one at all. An hour later, we returned to the foyer. Mrs. Evans smiled. "It feels like home." I nodded, though my heart ached. "It is. It always was. And now it can be yours." When they left, Linda squeezed my shoulder. "They'll make an offer. I can almost guarantee it." I stood in the quiet house, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator, the ticking clock on the wall. For once, the silence didn't accuse me. It released me. That evening, I wrote in my journal, "Tomorrow, I begin again." The call came the next afternoon. I was folding linens into a box when the phone rang, and for a moment, I thought it might be Helen. But it was Linda. "They've made an offer," she said, her tone bright. "Full asking price, no contingencies. They want to close within 3 weeks." I sank into the nearest chair, the folded sheet slipping from my lap. "That fast?" "That fast," she confirmed. "Do you want me to accept?" I closed my eyes, breathing slowly. The house had been my stage for decades, my refuge, my prison, my battlefield. And now, with one word, I could release it. "Yes," I said firmly. "Accept it." The papers arrived by evening, delivered in a neat envelope. I signed each page carefully, my pen steady, the strokes deliberate. With each signature, a weight slid off my shoulders. Afterward, I wandered through the rooms, no longer seeing them as mine. The dining table was just wood and legs, not the place where I had once been silenced. The living room was only space, not a trap of memories. Even the attic door seemed smaller now, less threatening. Its secrets would no longer belong to me. That night, I called Helen. "It's done," I told her. She let out a long breath. "I'm proud of you. So proud. Where will you go first?" "The coast," I said. "I've already been looking." "A little apartment, south-facing windows, enough room for me and maybe a plant or two." She laughed softly. "You'll make it a home, wherever you land." After we hung up, I sat by the window one last time, staring out at the yard. The swing swayed gently in the evening breeze, empty now, but not mournful. Just waiting for someone else's laughter. The final week passed quickly. I packed boxes methodically, donating more than I kept. Furniture, dishes, even curtains. I wanted as little of the old life as possible. Each item I left behind felt like shedding a layer of skin that no longer fit. On the last night, I lit a single candle in the kitchen. I didn't pray, not out loud, but I whispered gratitude, not for what I endured, but for what I had survived, for the strength to leave, for the friends who believed me, for the truth that had finally surfaced. When the flame flickered out, I knew I was ready. The house would belong to someone else now, and I would belong to myself. The bus rolled along the highway, carrying me farther from the town where my name had been spoken in whispers. I sat by the window, a small suitcase at my feet, a larger one stored below. My journal rested on my lap, unopened for once. Outside, the landscape shifted. Fields, rivers, then the faintest hint of ocean light on the horizon. When the driver announced the final stop, I stepped down into salt air. The town was small, just as I'd hoped. Rows of pastel houses, a bakery with its door propped open, the distant sound of gulls. The ocean stretched beyond, endless and steady, like something that could hold every secret I no longer carried. The apartment was modest, one bedroom with wide windows that faced the sea. Sunlight pooled across the floor, warming the bare wood. I set my bags down, breathing in the emptiness. It didn't feel lonely. It felt clean. The first thing I unpacked was the quilt. I spread it across the bed, the stitches worn but strong. Next came the plant Helen had pressed into my hands that morning, insisting I take something alive. I placed it on the windowsill, where the light touched its leaves. That evening, I walked to the shoreline. The sand was cool beneath my shoes, the tide pulling softly at the edge of the world. I stood there a long time, the wind tugging at my coat, listening to the hush of the waves. It was a silence unlike any I had known. Not heavy, not suffocating. A silence that made room. I thought of the trunk, the stone with my name etched deep. Of Julia's hand, tipping poison into my drink. Of the police lights flickering against the trees. All of it felt far away now, like a story that had finally been closed. I bent down, picked up a smooth stone, and held it in my palm. It wasn't carved, not marked with death or fear. Just a stone. Ordinary and solid. I carried it back with me, placed it on the windowsill beside the plant. A reminder that not every stone carries doom. Some are simply beginnings. In the weeks that followed, I built a new rhythm. Morning walks along the coast. Afternoons reading in the little library on Main Street. Evenings writing in my journal, not about betrayal or survival, but about the taste of fresh bread from the bakery, the sound of church bells on Sundays, the way the sky turned pink over the water. Helen visited once already, true to her word, bringing scones and laughter. When she left, she hugged me tightly and whispered, "You look like yourself again." And maybe I did. On my 73rd birthday, I sat on the balcony with a cup of tea, watching the tide roll in. No voices in my ear, no locks changed behind me, no stone waiting above me. Just the ocean, just the air, just me.